After 19 years, a millionaire sees his infertile ex-wife with 4 kids who look just like him. Then he. The shimmering lights of the Hollywood Grand Theater cascaded across the night sky like fallen stars. Inside the grand hall, laughter mingled with the clinking of crystal glasses. Violins sang through the air, and the sweetness of fine wine lingered like perfume. This was the night of the powerful, the Hollywood elite, where every smile was calculated and every glance could become an opportunity. Alexander Reed entered, his tailored tuxedo fitting his tall frame with practiced elegance. Heads turned instantly, eyes filled with both admiration and wariness. A legendary film producer, the man who could turn a nameless actor into a star overnight. He offered polite smiles, shook hands with familiar directors. "Alexander, wonderful to see you here. Your next film is bound to be a triumph." The same lines he had heard 1,000 times before, rehearsed compliments and empty flattery. He nodded, responded graciously, but inside, he felt hollow. Another night, another performance. Then, only a few steps in, a strange pressure wrapped around his chest. Not nerves, not stress, something deeper, like a door from the past had just been flung open. He froze, scanning the glittering crowd. And then, he saw her, Clara Monroe. His heart stumbled, breath caught in his throat. 19 years, nearly 2 decades since he had last seen her, and yet Clara was still so stunning that the air seemed to still around her. The teal silk gown draped her form with effortless grace. Her hair, once loose waves, now swept into a neat chignon, revealing the delicate line of her neck, the same neck he had once kissed, as if it were his only refuge. Alexander whispered in his mind, "Clara, is this real? Or am I only seeing the ghost of what I lost?" But her eyes told him it was no illusion. Still the same, deep, proud, and cold enough to make his heart tremble. "God, it's really you," he muttered under his breath. He should have turned away, should have blended back into the crowd, smiled, raised his glass, performed like Alexander Reed always did. But then he saw them. 4 young adults standing at Clara's side. They weren't casual companions. They weren't passing acquaintances. They stood close, grounded, like family. And what froze Alexander's blood was the undeniable truth. Their faces, their eyes, their bearing mirrored his own. "No. Impossible," he whispered, his hand tightening around the glass. In his mind, a voice from years ago echoed, "Clara cannot have children. That's the truth that had shattered their dream of a family, the truth that had driven him away." "Then who are they?" he rasped aloud, as if asking himself. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering into countless shards across the marble floor. A sharp crash drew curious stares. An actress leaned to her friend and whispered, "What's wrong with Reed?" But Alexander heard nothing. No lights, no music, no laughter. Only Clara. And those 4 faces. His throat burned, his chest ached. What if everything I believed for 19 years was a lie? What if... They're mine? The gala carried on, glittering and grand as ever. But for Alexander Reed, that single moment had torn his entire world apart. The music of the gala faded into a dull blur inside Alexander's mind. Beneath the glittering lights, the past returned like a storm. He closed his eyes, and in an instant, he was back there. 19 years ago, in their small apartment. The yellow glow of a desk lamp spilled over the sterile white papers. Clara sat across from him, her frail shoulders trembling, fingers laced together as if clinging to whatever strength remained. On the table lay the medical report, its bold words cutting deeper than any knife. Infertility confirmed. "Alexander," her voice broke. "The doctor said, I'll never have children." He froze, as though the world had collapsed. Moments later, he leapt to his feet, pacing the room. "No, there has to be another way. We can try something else. Maybe the doctor was wrong." Clara shook her head gently, tears spilling down her cheeks. "We've tried, Alex. Again and again. There's no hope left." His fists clenched, his voice trembling with anger and despair. "No. I dreamed of a family, of a house filled with laughter, children running down the halls. You know how much that means to me." "And what about me?" Clara cried, her voice cracking. "Isn't my love enough? Am I not enough for you?" His heart twisted, but the words escaped before he could stop them. Words that would haunt him forever. "I can't live without a family." Silence fell, heavier than death. Clara stood motionless, her eyes filled with a pain so raw that Alexander turned away, unable to face it. "But then our love was never enough," she whispered, broken. That night, Alexander left. He remembered the sound of his suitcase wheels scraping against the tiles, the heavy thud of the door closing behind him, the sound of everything ending. He told himself, "There's no other choice. I must go find another future." In the years that followed, Alexander buried himself in work. He built his name, rising from a young producer to one of Hollywood's most powerful men. Parties, flashing cameras, the adoration of the press. This became his world. He dated many women, rising actresses, famous models, even a few brilliant screenwriters. But none stayed long. Each relationship ended before it could become a family. Some wanted more of his time. Some dreamed of children. But Alexander always found reasons to pull away. He blamed his schedule, his projects. Deep down, he knew the truth. He no longer believed in the dream of family. Once lost with Clara, it became a void that no one else could fill. Night after night, his luxurious penthouse felt unbearably silent. Walls lined with movie posters, shelves stocked with fine whiskey, but no laughter, no children's footsteps. He had gained power, money, fame. Yet when the lights dimmed, all that remained was solitude gnawing at him. 19 years passed. He had never found a family, and now, seeing Clara with 4 young people who bore his face, his heart was torn apart. If they were truly his children, then the life he had lived was nothing more than an empty illusion. He had abandoned the very family he once dreamed of. He had rejected it with his own hands. Alexander clenched his fists, whispering in silent confession, "God, Clara, I made a terrible mistake." The words from 19 years ago, "I can't live without a family," still echoed in Alexander's head as he walked out of the gala. The glittering chandeliers, the laughter, the music, all of it blurred into the background. Each step felt heavy, as though the past itself was clinging to him, dragging him down. Outside, the Hollywood night carried a chill. He slid into his car, his hands trembling on the wheel. Clara's face, and those 4 hauntingly familiar faces beside her, refused to leave his mind. What if everything he had believed for 19 years had been a lie? What if they were his children? A hollow laugh escaped him, bitter and sharp. "I left because of a truth, and now that truth is crumbling." He pulled out his phone, fingers hovering for a moment before pressing a familiar number. The line picked up quickly. "Mr. Reed?" Julian Cross's calm, steady voice came through. The man who had been at Alexander's side for over a decade, through both triumphs and failures. Julian, Alexander swallowed, his voice rough. I need you to look into something. Clara Monroe, her life, and the 4 young people who were with her tonight. Silence stretched briefly before Julian replied, his tone cautious. I thought you ended everything with her years ago. Alexander closed his eyes, his head pressing against the seat. I did. But I have to know. I need to know. Do it, Julian. Don't make me wait. All right, Julian said firmly. He never argued when Alexander's voice carried that kind of desperation. That night, Alexander barely slept. His luxurious penthouse felt colder than ever, like a gilded prison. Posters on the walls, shelves of vintage wine, none of it mattered. He sat, staring at his phone, waiting for the truth to arrive. Hours dragged like centuries. By morning, the call came. Alexander snatched the phone instantly. Tell me, Julian. I dug deep, Julian said slowly. There are no adoption records, no surrogacy agreements, nothing to suggest Clara raised anyone else's children. Alexander's breath caught, his grip tightening. You mean, they're yours and hers, all 4. The words struck like a hammer. Alexander collapsed into his chair, his pulse hammering in his chest. No, it can't be. The doctors told me she couldn't. I found a name that appears in the files, Julian interrupted. Dr. Adrian Vale, a fertility specialist. He was pioneering experimental treatments at the time. His name is directly tied to Clara's records. Alexander frowned. Vale, I've heard of him. But he died a few years ago. Still, one report remains. Treatment exceeded expectations. Patient CM responded positively due to unique genetic compatibility with partner AR. Alexander froze. AR, his own initials. He lowered the phone slowly, vision blurring. Clara carried my children, and I never knew. My God, he whispered. I walked away, believing there was no hope. And for 19 years, my children grew up never knowing their father. Julian's voice softened. Perhaps she wanted to protect them, or perhaps she never forgave you for leaving. Alexander shut his eyes, his fists clenching until his nails dug into his palms. Anger, guilt, sorrow, all colliding. Why didn't she tell me? Why keep it buried this long? Yet beneath the storm, one truth remained. No matter the reason, he had lost 19 years. 19 years of their lives. Years he could never reclaim. He bowed his head, whispering like a broken confession. Clara, my children. I made a mistake too great to forgive. All day, Alexander couldn't focus on anything. Calls from the studio, messages from partners. They were nothing but noise. Only one thought consumed him. He had to see Clara. He had to face her. He had to hear the truth from her own lips. By nightfall, rain drizzled over the streets of Los Angeles. His car stopped before an old townhouse, the same place he and Clara had once called home. The brick walls, the familiar windows, all of it pulled him backward into the past. Alexander sat in the car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel. His heart pounded harder than in any $100 million negotiation. I left, believing there was no hope. But if they really are my children, then what has the last 19 years been? Finally, he opened the door, stepped into the rain, and walked toward the house. His knuckles rapped against the wood. Footsteps sounded from inside. The door creaked open. A young woman stood there, her gaze sharp, posture proud. Those eyes. Clara's eyes. Alexander began, but the words stuck in his throat. She crossed her arms. What do you want? I need to see your mother, he said, voice unsteady. She doesn't owe you anything. The chill in her tone pierced him. You should leave. The words cut deep, but he couldn't turn away. Not this time. He steadied himself, met her gaze. If I have to, I'll stand here all night, but I need to see her. Silence stretched. At last, she stepped aside, leaving the door ajar. Suit yourself. Alexander stepped inside, his heart sinking. The house smelled the same, aged wood, old paint. A painting Clara once hung still graced the living room wall. Each step felt like treading on memories. Then he heard it, another set of footsteps. Clara emerged from the hallway. She froze when she saw him. Time stood still. "Alexander," she said at last, her voice calm, no longer trembling like years ago. "Why are you here?" He opened his mouth, but all the words he'd rehearsed vanished. Only one question slipped out. "Why? Didn't you tell me?" Clara's lips curved into a bitter smile. "Tell you what, Alex, that the moment you walked away, life gave me what you swore was impossible. That while you built your empire, I raised 4 children who never knew their father." Alexander closed his eyes, swallowing hard. "I didn't know. If I had... What would you have done?" She cut in, voice sharp. "Stayed? Out of love? Or out of obligation?" Her words sliced through him. Deep down, he knew. Back then, he might not have been strong enough to choose rightly. He drew in a ragged breath. "I was wrong. About everything. And I'll spend the rest of my life making it right." Another voice broke through. "No, you won't." Alexander turned. A young man stood on the staircase, fury burning in his eyes. Behind him, 3 other faces hovered in the shadows, each carrying the same look of anger. "You left before you even knew we existed," the young man, Elias, spat. "And now you think a few sorry words will fix 19 years? Where were you all this time?" Alexander's chest constricted. He looked at each face, each reflection of himself staring back in pain. He had no answers, only the truth. "I was wrong." Alexander swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Every day I thought about a family. But I didn't know you existed, and that ignorance is my greatest sin." Gabriel, quieter than his brother, spoke for the first time. His voice was calm but cold. "We don't need you. We've lived just fine without a father." The words cut deep. Alexander nodded, accepting the blow. "I understand. I'm not here to force myself into your lives. I'm only asking for a chance, even the smallest one." Clara tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady, unreadable. She said nothing, but she was listening. Then Sophia's voice cut through the silence. "A chance?" She looked him straight in the eyes, suspicion sharp in her tone. "You think a few words are enough?" Alexander's voice shook. "No, I know they aren't enough, but I will prove myself through actions. Give me a chance. To be here. To never walk away again." Silence again. Elias tensed, ready to argue, but Isabella, the youngest, gently laid a hand on her brother's arm. Her eyes were softer, still guarded, but not completely shut. "We'll see," she whispered. Elias turned to her, then exhaled heavily. He said nothing more. Clara folded her arms, studying Alexander. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and steady. "We promise nothing. No forgiveness, no acceptance. But if you truly mean it, then prove it." Alexander lifted his gaze, a fragile spark of hope igniting within him. He nodded firmly. "I will, with everything I have." That night, as he stepped out of the old house, the rain still fell cold and relentless. Yet inside his chest, a small flame had been lit. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, just a door left slightly ajar. But for him, It was everything. "We'll see." Those two words became the small flame that kept him standing. That night, Alexander swore to himself. This time, he would not walk away. The next day, he began with Elias, the eldest, passionate about cinema, so much like Alexander's younger self, yet filled with doubt. Alexander didn't send apologies or desperate pleas. Instead, he chose something simple: a short email containing an article about new trends in film production. At the end, he added just a few words. "I thought you might find this interesting." No reply came. For days, silence filled the void between them. But one evening, Alexander noticed Elias had shared the very article on his social media. No mention of the sender, no comment attached. But to Alexander, it was a sign. A seed had been planted. With Gabriel, Alexander chose silence. The young man wasn't one for long messages. Julian had mentioned he spent most of his time on the basketball court, where the pounding of shoes spoke louder than words. One weekend, Alexander went to a small gym. He sat high in the bleachers, cap pulled low, unnoticed. He simply watched, following each pass, each shot. When the final buzzer sounded, Gabriel scored the winning basket. Friends cheered, teammates slapped his back. Alexander clapped softly, just enough for himself to hear. For a brief moment, Gabriel looked up. Their eyes met. No smile, no nod, but he didn't look away either. Just a second, and then he returned to his teammates. Alexander sat still, but inside the world shifted. Sophia was the hardest. She resembled Clara most of all. The sharp gaze, the guarded silence. Alexander sent her messages, birthday wishes, questions about her school presentation, even a simple line, "I hope you had a good day." All of them fell into the void. No response, no sign she even read them. But Alexander didn't give up. He knew silence didn't always mean rejection. Sometimes it was a shield for a wounded heart. He kept sending, gently, without pressure, like planting seeds in barren ground, waiting for the day they might take root. It was Isabella who opened first. One afternoon, as Alexander sat alone in his office, his phone buzzed. A message appeared. "If you really want to make things right, don't give up." Alexander read it again and again, eyes blurring. His hands trembled as he typed only 3 words. "I never will." Just 3 words, but for him, it was a beginning. In the weeks that followed, Alexander clung to one principle: presence. Not intrusion, not force, simply being there. When Elias held a film discussion at school, Alexander sat quietly in the back. When Gabriel practiced at the park, Alexander stood at a distance, leaving only when the game ended. And one night, as he turned to leave after practice, Gabriel suddenly called out, "Do you play?" Alexander froze, certain he'd misheard. But Gabriel stood there, ball in hand, his eyes no longer entirely cold. Alexander smiled faintly. "I can try." Gabriel said nothing more. He didn't invite, but he didn't turn away either. And that was enough for Alexander to know. Another door had opened. That night, back in his penthouse, Alexander sat by the window watching the city lights. The weight of 19 lost years still pressed heavy on his chest. But for the first time in all those years, he believed he was no longer alone. After the first tentative steps toward his children, Alexander knew his journey would never be complete without facing Clara. The children were walls built from anger and loss, but Clara was the root, the woman who had carried the pain he left behind for 19 years. If there was to be healing, it had to begin with her. He knew words of apology or empty promises would mean nothing now. After so many years, the only way to prove himself was through presence. Quiet, steady, undeniable. He began with the mornings. Clara had the habit of visiting a small cafe near her house, the same place they once sat together, dreaming of scripts and futures. Alexander chose a corner seat, arriving a little earlier, ordering a black coffee, pretending to read the paper. He never spoke, never sought her attention. He just wanted her to know he was still there. Day after day, Clara ignored him, but one morning, her eyes brushed his, just for a second before she turned away. A single second, but Alexander's heart trembled. It meant she could no longer completely pretend he wasn't there. Days later, fate brought another chance. Clara's grocery bag tore, a glass vase shattering on the sidewalk. Alexander, nearby, rushed forward without hesitation. "Let me," he said softly, steady voice. Clara froze, surprised, but didn't stop him. He gathered the fallen items, placed them into a new bag, and handed it back. Their eyes met briefly. In them, Alexander saw confusion and the wall she still held. Clara didn't thank him, only gave a small nod before walking away. But even that silence told him she had let him come closer, if only by an inch. Alexander pressed on. One rainy evening, driving past, he saw Clara outside her house, arms wrapped around herself, no umbrella. He stopped the car, stepped out, and held one above her. She looked up, startled. "Oh, what are you doing here?" He didn't answer right away. The rain soaked his shoulders as he shielded her. Then quietly he said, "I'm not leaving again. Not this time." Her eyes studied him, unreadable, before she sighed and turned inside, leaving him there, drenched but faintly smiling. She hadn't chased him away, and that was enough. Another day, Alexander remembered Clara's garden. Once, it had been their shared haven, filled with white chrysanthemums. Now it lay in neglect. He came with new plants, dirtied his hands, replanted each flower, as if stitching old memories back together. When Clara returned, she stopped at the doorway, staring at the blossoms glowing in the twilight. Alexander said nothing, only stepped back. She reached out, touched a petal, and a tear slipped down her cheek before she quickly wiped it away. He saw it and knew. Her heart still remembered, buried though it was. Then one night, his phone rang. Clara's name appeared. His voice shook as he answered. "Clara? Can you come?" Within minutes, he was there. Clara sat on the balcony, wine glass in hand, gaze distant. "If one day I asked you to leave," she said softly, "would you?" Alexander sat across from her, eyes locked on hers. He hesitated, then replied slowly, "If that's truly what you wanted, I would." Clara didn't blink. "Then why should I believe you won't leave again?" His chest tightened. He knew this was the question that mattered most. He drew a deep breath, voice steady. "Because last time I left, I thought I had no choice. But this time I stay. Because I know my only choice is you." Clara remained silent, studying him for a long moment. The quiet was heavy, but no longer frozen. And in her gaze, Alexander saw it. A tiny crack in the wall, fragile but real. And he knew, after all these years, he had found the path back. After that night with Clara, Alexander realized one thing. He couldn't stop at being present for each child individually. To truly belong, he needed to reach all four of them together. They were no longer children, but young adults carrying invisible scars. And to heal, he would need to build a bridge, step by step. The chance came one afternoon when Isabella sent him a short message. "We'll be at the cafe tomorrow. If you want, come." Alexander's heart nearly stopped. He had been waiting for this moment. The next day, he entered the cafe. By the window sat 4 familiar faces. Elias watched him warily. Gabriel crossed his arms in silence. Sophia kept her gaze down as if to block him out, while Isabella offered a faint, gentle smile, the softest of them all. Alexander drew in a deep breath and sat down. The silence was heavier than any boardroom he had ever walked into. Sophia spoke first, her voice sharp. "What do you want from us?" Alexander set his cup down, looking at each of them. "I don't want to reclaim 19 lost years. That's impossible. I just want, from today forward, to be part of your lives, even in the smallest way." Gabriel scoffed. "A little late for that, don't you think?" Alexander nodded. "I know, but better late than never, and I'm willing to prove it, whatever it takes." Sophia lifted her gaze, eyes cold as steel. "If you had known we existed back then, would you have stayed?" The question struck him like a hammer. He wanted to say yes, but he knew the man he had been 19 years ago was not the man he was now. Looking into her eyes, he said slowly, "I can't change the past, but if I could live it again, I would choose to stay. Nothing is more important than you." Silence followed. Only the faint clink of a spoon against porcelain filled the air. Then Isabella whispered, glancing around the table, "At least, you came. That's a start." Alexander smiled, his chest tightening with emotion. He knew a fragile bridge had begun to form. In the days after the cafe meeting, Alexander felt something had shifted. It wasn't forgiveness, nor full acceptance, but the air between him and his children was no longer as heavy with estrangement. It felt like ice beginning to thaw, exposing tiny cracks. He noticed the details. When Elias debated passionately with friends about a film, Alexander caught him citing material he had sent. When Gabriel played, his eyes sometimes flicked toward the stands, as if checking that Alexander was still there. Sophia remained silent, but once when he sent her a good-night message, the scene mark appeared, and that alone kept Alexander smiling the whole night. Isabella, as always, was the most open. One afternoon, she sat across from him in a cafe, hands clasped, her voice quiet. "Do you know how hard it was for Mom?" Alexander stayed silent. He wanted to say, "I know," but the truth was he hadn't been there to see it. His voice broke as he replied, "I wasn't there, and that is my greatest mistake." Isabella sighed, her gaze weary rather than accusatory. "She did everything alone, but at least now you're here." Alexander longed to take her hand, but restrained himself. Every step had to be careful. The changes became clearer. One evening, Elias approached with his laptop, hesitating. "I have a short film project. Could you give me feedback?" Alexander almost didn't believe his ears. He smiled gently. "I'd love to." In Elias's eyes, caution remained, but also a flicker of trust. Gabriel too began to shift. After a game, he tossed the ball toward Alexander. "Try." Alexander caught it, clumsily dribbled, and Gabriel laughed out loud. That laugh, so simple, so pure, struck Alexander's heart with a joy he hadn't felt in 19 years. Sophia was the hardest. Yet one night, Alexander received a message. 4 words. "Stop texting so much." He laughed aloud. After dozens of unanswered notes, she had finally responded, even if only to scold. He typed back softly, "I'll text less, but I'm still here." No reply came, but this time the message wasn't deleted. For him, it was enough. Then came Clara's suggestion, hesitant yet decisive. "Maybe we should all have dinner together." Alexander stared at her, stunned. then nodded. He knew this was a milestone. That evening, the family gathered around the large wooden table. The sound of cutlery mingled with halting conversations. Elias spoke of his film project. Gabriel complained about practice. Isabella chatted excitedly about a new song. Sophia stayed silent, eating quietly. Alexander listened, smiling, as if reliving a dream long lost. Near the end, Sophia suddenly spoke. "Dad, could you pass me the salt?" The room stilled. Elias glanced up. Isabella smiled faintly. Gabriel's eyes widened. Even Clara paused, watching her daughter. Alexander froze, then slowly reached for the salt, passing it across. "Thanks, Dad." Two simple words, soft yet stronger than any blade that had ever cut his heart. His eyes blurred. His throat tightened. He lowered his head, whispering almost to himself, "Thank you." In that moment, Alexander knew this dinner was more than a meal. It was the beginning of a family being restored, the cracks healing slowly, bridged by a single word that erased 19 years of silence. After that dinner, when Sophia first called him Dad, something inside Alexander broke open. He knew the journey was far from over, but the door had opened, and this time he would never let it close again. 2 years passed, 2 years of dinners no longer filled with silence, mornings where he and Clara shared coffee in quiet peace, moments when Elias handed him a new script. Gabriel called him to the court to shoot hoops. Isabella sent him a good-night message. And Sophia, once the coldest, sometimes asked, "What do you think of this essay?" The wounds had not vanished, but they were healing through ordinary moments. And Alexander knew it was time to take one more step, the final one to prove he would never walk away again. He decided to propose to Clara. When he shared his plan, the children didn't object. Instead, they were eager to help. Sophia, with her meticulous nature, took charge of the details. Elias and Gabriel prepared the garden, the place that held their parents' memories. Isabella, tender-hearted, chose the ring. She placed the small box into Alexander's hands and whispered, "Mom's been waiting a long time. Don't let her down again." Alexander's heart swelled. He embraced them, feeling for the first time the unity of his family. That night, Clara believed it was just another family dinner. But when she stepped into the garden, she froze. Before her stretched a wonderland, golden lights strung across pathways, white flowers in bloom, and at the center, Alexander stood waiting, eyes brimming with emotion. Elias, Gabriel, Sophia, and Isabella surrounded the space, smiling knowingly. Clara covered her mouth, tears already welling. Alexander stepped forward, his voice trembling but steady. "Clara, it's been over 20 years since the day I lost you. These past 2 years, you and our children have given me a second chance, one I never believed I deserved. I can't promise life will be perfect, but I can promise one thing. I will never leave again. Not ever." He opened the box, revealing the ring Isabella had chosen. His eyes blurred as he knelt down. "Clara Monroe, will you marry me again?" The garden fell silent. Clara looked at her children, their eyes full of hope, then back at Alexander, the man who had once left, but who had returned and proven himself through every small act. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes, I will." Cheers erupted. Their children rushed in, embracing them as the lights shimmered through joyful tears. Alexander rose, pulling Clara into his arms, whispering, "I'll never let you go again." And in that moment, beneath the glow of lights and the bloom of memories, their family was not only mended, it was reborn. The night Clara said yes in the glowing garden, Alexander knew a new chapter had begun. Yet he also knew the wedding didn't need grandeur or extravagance. What mattered was the quiet peace they had fought so long to reclaim. And so their wedding would be simple. No press, no hundreds of guests, just family. Clara wore a modest white dress, her hair falling softly over her shoulders. Alexander chose a classic suit, elegant but unadorned. The garden behind the house, a place steeped in memories, was adorned with white flowers and strands of golden lights. Elias and Gabriel built a wooden arch. Sophia carefully arranged the chairs, and Isabella held the bouquet her mother would carry. When Clara stepped out, Alexander's throat tightened. He saw not only the woman he loved, but the embodiment of strength, resilience, and the trust he had once lost, but now regained. Their children stood proudly by their side. Elias straightened his father's tie. Gabriel gripped his shoulder firmly. Sophia whispered, "Mom's happy." And Isabella's eyes shimmered with tears as she smiled. The ceremony began. No priest, no elaborate rituals, just Alexander, Clara, and their 4 children. Alexander took Clara's hand, his voice trembling but resolute. "I once lost the greatest chance of my life, but today I'm not here asking for another chance. I'm here to promise that for the rest of my life, I will never let you go again." Clara's eyes welled as she replied, "I once thought we could never find our way back. But you've proven love doesn't vanish. It waits for us to be patient enough to rediscover it. Yes, Alexander. Yes, I'll spend the rest of my life with you." Applause burst from their children. Isabella handed her mother the bouquet. Elias and Gabriel embraced their father, and Sophia quietly brushed away her own tears. Alexander kissed Clara beneath the golden sunset, surrounded by their children's joyful cheers. And in that moment, he felt this was more than a wedding. It was the vow of a family, united after 19 lost years, determined to live each day together from now on. He understood then that all the fame, fortune, and glory he once chased meant nothing compared to the treasure before him, his family. And this time, he would never let it slip away.